Good day once again, everybody, and welcome back to our course readings in Philippine history. And we are still in our chapter 2, which is all about the content and contextual analysis of selected primary sources in Philippine history. So we already discussed this learning objectives in our previous video discussion. And now we'll be proceeding on what we will be discuss. So we will be discussing about the analysis of Pigafetta's Chronicle. Since we already discussed the first voyage around the world by Magellan by Antonio Pigafetta, and now we are going to give analysis or examination of what happened during their circumnavigations. Okay, sige, let's start with the analysis of Pigafetta's Chronicle. So the Chronicle of Antonio Pigafetta was one of the most cited documents by historians who wish to study the pre-colonial history. So if you want to study the pre-colonial history, we have a very limited sources to compare or to rely. That is why the Chronicle of Antonio Pigafetta was one of the most cited documents if a historian wishes to study the pre-colonial Philippines. And as one of the earliest written accounts, Pigafetta was seen a credible source for a period, which was unchronicled and undocumented. Moreover, being the earliest data documentation, it was believed that Pigafetta's writing account for the purest pre-colonial society. Indeed, that Pigafetta's work is one of the great importance in the study and writing of Philippine history. If we want to write about Philippine history, and then Pigafetta's Chronicle is one of the most important sources that we really need to consider. Next, nevertheless, there needs to have more nuanced reading of the source within a contextual backdrop. Since our chapter talks about the context or content, so while we are reading the content or ang laman ng kabuuang storya, we need also to consider the contextual backdrop. And the student of history should recognize certain biases accompanying the author and his identity, loyalties, and the circumstances that he was in and how it affected the text that he responded. Diba? In documenting or writing his chronicle, he was using his own perspective. Diba? Pigafetta was using his own perspective. And that is the context or factors that we need to consider. Next, in the case of Pigafetta, the reader needs to understand that he was a chronicler commissioned by the King of Spain to accompany and document a voyage intended to expand the Spanish Empire. Diba? If we are commissioned by someone to do something, like for example, to write, we really need to give a positive or a good news, just like in the case of Pigafetta. He was commissioned by the King of Spain. So we go back to the voyage. Diba? There's a lot of scenarios that we can say that were or was a positive news to the King of Spain, just like sa duha ka kings nga ni-kneel down to worship in the sense nga king sila, dapat dili sila musunod. And just like another scenario sa katong King of Cebu na nabaptize ni Magellan. So with this, if you are commissioned by someone, you really need to satisfy the request and make a positive outcome. Not all positive, but more on positive news. no? Dili tanan positive, pero more on positive news. If you are commissioned by someone, just like Pigafetta nga, i-commission siya by the King of Spain. Yun. Next is that we are referring to Pigafetta, was also a noble descent who came from a rich family in Italy. So, kika ni si Pigafetta from Italy. And of course, Pigafetta belonged to the nobility. Being of the noble descent means he came from a family that held a high rank, uh, a high social rank, typically associated with titles and of course aristocracy. No, mga noble descent din sila nga mga tao. Ang family ni Pigafetta. These attributes influence his narrative. His selection of details to be included in the text. Okay, in the text. So his characterization of the people and of the species that he encountered, and his interpretation and retelling of the events, all of this influences Pigafetta on how to select in part of text. And as a scholar, we are referring to Pigafetta. As a scholar of cartography and geography, he was able to give details on geography and climate of the places that their voyage had reached. If we say cartography, mo ni siya ang someone nga expert in making maps. And if we say geography, it is someone who is expert in studying areas, places, and even environment. So, moto, si Pigafetta daw scholar of cartography and geography. Therefore, Pigafetta played a crucial role in documenting the expedition. And overall, Pigafetta's contribution were not just significant for their immediate practical use in navigation and exploration, but also for their lasting value in providing a rich historical record of his groundbreaking expedition. And in reading Pigafetta's description of the people, one has to keep in mind that he was coming from a 16th century European perspective. So, in summary, when reading Pigafetta's account, it is important to understand that his description were shaped by the knowledge, beliefs, and biases of a 16th century European. And modern readers, kanang mga modern readers karon, should approach his writings with an awareness of this historical and, of course, cultural context, recognizing that his perspective is just one of many and reflects the attitudes and understanding of his time. Hence, the reader might notice how Pigafetta, whether implicitly or explicitly, regarded the indigenous belief system and way of life as an inferior to that of Christianity and of the European. He would always remark on the nakedness of the natives or how he was fascinated by their exotic culture. And he always noticed that the natives kay always nga nakahubad and siguro diri nag-start ang word na exotic or kakaiba because it's exotic daw para kang Pigafetta anong always ramaning ang mga native nga nakahubad. So it's rare for Pigafetta kay wala niya nakasanayan nga nakahubad ang mga natives. Again, si Pigafetta gikan sa high social rank. So it's exotic or it's rare sa iya nga ang kani mga natives sigurag hubo. Per me nga nakahubad. But in the perspective of the natives, dili ni siya exotic kay mao man jud ni ang ilang culture nga nakasanayan. Marag na culture shock lang tibali si Pigafetta ani. Pigafetta also noticeably emphasized the natives' amazement and illiteracy to the European artillery merchandise, and other goods in the same way that Pigafetta also repeatedly mentioned the abundance of spices like ginger and of precious metals like gold. And we can see the objectives of the Magellan expedition because they are looking for the spices and the riches. No? And that's why in his chronicle, it was highlighted the ginger and gold. And he was writing a report to the king that this island is rich in gold and a lot of spices. Di ba? A watering place, a good sign. Dito ang nakita nila Pigafetta and Magellan ang first sign sa gold din Katonga Island. And he also emphasized the illiteracy of the natives to the European artillery sa kanilang mga armas and mining more. No? Mo na ang na-emphasize po ni Pigafetta. His observation and assessment of the indigenous culture employed the European standard. And Pigafetta's perspective was too narrow. Narrow lang daw kaayo to realize that such attire was only appropriate to the tropical climate of the islands. O di ba? Katong mga attire or gipasuot sa mga native daw was only appropriate to the tropical climate of that island. Lain man sa pag magbaga kag sanina tapos naka sa desert and lain sa pag nakabahag ka all the time if tugnaw ang island. Di ba? So it was only appropriate to the tropical climate of the island. Na siya. And the same was true for materials that the natives used for their houses like palm and bamboo. These materials would let more air come through the house and compensate for the climate in the islands. And that's the reason why in ana ang ilahang styles ilahang house made of bamboo, but instead nakabagay lang po sila sa climate sa ilahang island. No? Next is that it should be understood that such observation were rooted from the context of Pigafetta and his era. Sa 16th century ni siya ha. For example, Europe was dominated by the Holy Roman Empire, whose loyalty and purpose was the domination of the Catholic Church all over the world. Hence, other belief systems different from that of Christianity were perceived to be blasphemous and barbaric, even demonic. So, and with this, ang belief system or ang ilang tinuuhan kay lahi sa Christian kay they perceived to be demonic. Siya. Aside from this, the 16th century economy was mercantilist. Such system measures the wealth of kingdom based on their accumulation of bullions or precious metals like gold and silver. And we can see that most objective of the colonization is about Christianity and trade. That is to make the kingdom of Spain more wealthier. It was not surprising, therefore, that Pigafetta would always mention the abundance of gold in the island, as shown in his description of the leaders wearing gold rings and golden daggers, and of the rich gold mines. Moti katong sa senaryo sa katong na sila sa Butuan, King of Balanghay, diba? Raya Shago and Raya Kalambo. And diba, Pigafetta also mentioned that the kings are always wearing gold materials, and everything was gold, was made of gold. An empire like that of the Spain would indeed search for new islands where they can acquire more gold and wealth to be on top of all the European nations. So in that time, grabe ang ilang competition. Gusto nila magpakadato wala na sila pake kung unsa or kinsa na ilang gitapakan. No? Very familiar kayo siya. The obsession with spices might be odd for Filipinos because of its ordinaries in the Philippines, but understanding the context would reveal that spices were scarce in Europe and hence were seen as a prestige goods. Kay the Spanish wants to find spices, but for the Filipinos, makaingon sila nga, murag kuyaw ni sila. Kay for us Filipinos, it's very ordinary ra nga naatay mga spices or mga lamas here in the Philippines. And because Europe, wala kaayo sila spices dito. Therefore, it was very demanded. It's very demand. Kay ang supply kay low. Diba? Ano ba na? Pag demand taas, supply ang low. Pag taas ang supply, gamay ang low. Pag gamay ang demand. Diba? Inaana na siya. Inaana dyan na basta pagtaas ang supply, ito ang ingon, gamay ang demand, and kung magkataas ang demand, magkagamay ang supply. Next, in that era, Spanish and Portugal covered the control of Spice Islands because it would have led to a certain increase in wealth, influence, and power. This context should be used and understood in order to have a more qualified reading of Pigafetta's account. So that's the analysis of uh, Pigafetta's Chronicle. So to wrap up the analysis of Pigafetta's Chronicle, his document about the voyage of Magellan around the world is very significant or very important as our source in studying the pre-colonial Philippine history. And of course, this chronicle, it gives us a purest picture of the pre-colonial Philippines, and we have to take into consideration that he was writing based on his perspective, and we can see what's the objective of their voyage here in the Philippines. We had that one of their objectives is Christianity, wealth, and spices. Diba? Mao na ang kasagaran nga, mao na mostly ang objective of their voyage here in the Philippines. The Christianity, wealth, and spices. That's the end of the analysis of Pigafetta's Chronicle. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening our discussion. Thank you so much and have a great day. Thank you.